Welcome to Somnus Sagas, where history unfolds gently in the quiet hours of the night. I'm your narrator for this evening's journey through time, exploring the harsh realities of work in bygone eras. Tonight, we'll discover the stories of those who labored in conditions we can barely imagine today, their struggles illuminating the long path toward the workplace protections we often take for granted. As you settle into your bed, allow yourself to drift back through the centuries with me. We'll visit ancient Rome, medieval Europe, Industrial Revolution Britain, and beyond, meeting the people whose daily toil was often a matter of survival against overwhelming odds. Their stories, while sometimes difficult, remind us of human resilience and the gradual progress of civilization. Close your eyes and let your breathing slow as we begin this thoughtful exploration of history's most challenging occupations. Each story we share tonight carries within it the echoes of countless lives, lived fully despite extraordinary hardship. In the bustling streets of ancient Rome, beneath the marble grandeur of the empire, existed one of history's most unpleasant occupations, the fuller. These were the dry cleaners of the ancient world, responsible for cleaning and treating woolen garments that formed the backbone of Roman fashion. Picture, if you will, a typical day in a fullery around 100 CE. The morning sun filters through small windows into workshops filled with large stone basins. The air is thick with the acrid smell of urine and sulfur. For you see, Roman fullers used human and animal urine as their primary cleaning agent, collecting it from public latrines and even encouraging passers-by to contribute to their supply. The fuller would begin his day by sorting through piles of soiled togas and tunics, often stained with wine, oil, and the grime of daily Roman life. He would then climb into the stone basins, barefoot, to trample the garments in a mixture of stale urine, fuller's earth, and various alkaline substances. The ammonia from decomposing urine would burn his skin and fill his lungs with noxious fumes. Hour after hour, the fuller would dance this peculiar dance, stamping and treading upon the wet wool, his feet becoming raw and cracked from the caustic solutions. The smell would cling to his skin, his hair, his very being. No amount of washing could fully remove the odor that marked him as a member of this lowly profession. After the trampling came the rinsing, done in flowing water channels that ran through the workshop. Then came the carding process, where the fuller would brush the wet wool with thistleheads to raise the nap, often cutting his hands on the sharp spines. Finally, the garments were stretched on frames and fumigated with burning sulfur, adding another layer of toxic fumes to the workshop's atmosphere. The fuller's social standing reflected the nature of his work. Despite providing an essential service, he was looked down upon by Roman society, excluded from many social functions, and often forced to live in designated areas of the city. His children would likely follow in his footsteps, trapped in a cycle of malodorous toil. Yet these men persisted, generation after generation, their labor ensuring that Roman citizens could present themselves in clean, white togas. They were the invisible backbone of Roman respectability, paying the price in burned skin, damaged lungs, and social ostracism so that the empire could maintain its facade of cleanliness and civilization. As we move forward through time to medieval Europe, we encounter another profession that existed in the shadows of society, the gong farmer. The very name might sound quaint to modern ears, but make no mistake, this was perhaps one of the most revolting occupations in human history. In the narrow, winding streets of medieval London, Paris, and other great cities, human waste posed a constant problem. With no modern sewage systems, wealthy households and public buildings relied on primitive toilets called guardrobes, essentially seats positioned over deep pits. When these pits filled to capacity, someone had to empty them. That someone was the gong farmer. Imagine Thomas the gong farmer, working in London during the 14th century. By law, he could only perform his duties during the deep hours of the night, earning him the nickname Night Soil Man. As darkness fell across the city, Thomas would gather his tools, long-handled shovels, buckets, and a cart pulled by an unfortunate horse that, like its master, would bear the permanent scent of human waste. Thomas would descend into the fetid pits, sometimes 10 feet deep or more, filled with decades of accumulated waste. The methane gases rising from the decomposing matter could overwhelm a man in minutes, and many gong farmers died from asphyxiation in these putrid caverns. The lucky ones merely suffered constant nausea and respiratory problems. Working by torchlight, Thomas would shovel the sodden waste into buckets, which were then hauled up by rope and loaded onto his cart. The work was backbreaking, as the waste had often hardened into a cement-like consistency at the bottom of the pits. Sometimes he would discover coins, jewelry, or other valuables that had been dropped through the guardrobe seats. Small compensation for his suffering. The smell was indescribable. It clung to everything: his clothes, his skin, his hair. No amount of washing could remove it entirely. Thomas lived in a world apart from other citizens, forced to announce his presence with a bell so that decent folk could avoid him. Tavern keepers would refuse him service, and many shopkeepers would not allow him inside their establishments. Yet the gong farmer's work was absolutely essential. Without men like Thomas, medieval cities would have drowned in their own waste, breeding disease and making urban life impossible. They were paid relatively well for their troubles, often earning more than skilled craftsmen. But no amount of money could buy them social acceptance or escape from the stigma of their profession. The waste they collected was not simply discarded. Medieval farmers prized human waste as fertilizer, calling it night soil. Gong farmers would often have arrangements with rural farmers, selling their malodorous cargo to fertilize the fields that would eventually feed the very people whose waste they had collected. It was a perfect, if unpleasant, circle of medieval life. Some gong farmers accumulated considerable wealth over their careers, but they remained outcasts, their money unable to wash away the stench of their occupation. Their children often followed different paths, using their father's earnings to enter more respectable trades, thus ending the cycle of familial involvement in this necessary but reviled profession. As the Industrial Revolution transformed Britain in the 18th and 19th centuries, it brought with it new forms of exploitation and suffering. Among the most heartbreaking of these was the practice of using small children to clean the narrow, twisting chimneys that heated the grand houses of the wealthy. Picture young William, barely 6 years old, standing in the pre-dawn darkness of 1820s London. His master, a chimney-sweeping contractor, has purchased him from a workhouse for a few pounds. William's childhood, what little of it remains, will be spent crawling through spaces so narrow that only the smallest children can navigate them. The day begins before sunrise. William and the other climbing boys, as they were called, gather their tools, scrapers, brushes, and collecting bags. Their knees and elbows are already scarred from countless scrapes against rough brick and stone. Their bodies bear the permanent black stains of soot that no amount of washing can remove. William approaches his first chimney of the day, a narrow flue barely wide enough for his small frame. The space is pitch black, filled with decades of accumulated soot and debris. As he begins to climb, using his back and knees to brace himself against the walls, loose soot cascades down around him, filling his mouth, nose, and lungs with the acrid, choking dust. The climb is treacherous. One wrong move could send him plummeting down the flue to serious injury or death. The brickwork scrapes his skin raw as he inches upward, sometimes becoming wedged in particularly narrow sections and having to work himself free through sheer determination and terror of his master's punishment, should he fail to complete his task. As William climbs higher, the air becomes thinner and more toxic. The accumulated gases from years of fires create a poisonous atmosphere that burns his throat and makes his head spin. Sometimes he encounters unexpected obstacles, loose bricks, bird nests, or the decomposing remains of other climbing boys who became trapped and died in these dark passages. The work takes its toll on young bodies in horrific ways. The constant contact with soot and chemicals causes chimney sweeps cancer, a particularly aggressive form of scrotal cancer that typically appeared in boys during their teenage years. The repeated scraping and climbing often resulted in severe spinal deformities, leaving many former climbing boys permanently hunched and disabled. The boys lived in appalling conditions, sleeping on bags of soot in cold cellars, fed on scraps, and rarely, if ever, bathed. They were frequently beaten for slow work or minor infractions. Many developed serious respiratory conditions from constantly breathing soot and toxic gases. Their average life expectancy was shockingly low, with most dying before reaching adulthood from disease, accidents, or cancer. Yet these children were seen as essential to the functioning of polite society. The intricate chimney systems of Georgian and Victorian houses required regular cleaning to prevent fires, and only the smallest children could navigate the narrow passages. Wealthy homeowners preferred not to think about the suffering that kept their hearths burning cleanly. The plight of climbing boys gradually became a cause célèbre for social reformers. Writers like Charles Dickens brought their suffering to public attention, describing in vivid detail the lives of these forgotten children. Slowly, public opinion began to turn against the practice. Lord Shaftesbury led parliamentary efforts to ban the use of child chimney sweeps, but progress was slow. The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1834 was largely ineffective, as it was poorly enforced and contained numerous loopholes. It wasn't until 1875 that the practice was finally outlawed, though some children continued to be used illegally for years afterward. By then, mechanical cleaning devices had been developed that could do the work more effectively than children. But the transition came too late for the thousands of boys who had already died or been permanently damaged by this cruel trade. The story of the climbing boys reminds us that progress often comes at a terrible human cost, and that society's luxuries are sometimes built upon the suffering of its most vulnerable members. In the factories of 19th century Europe and America, few occupations were as dangerous as making matchsticks. What seems like a simple, everyday product carried with it a hidden horror that would devastate the lives of thousands of workers, particularly young women and girls who dominated this industry. Let us visit a match factory in Victorian London, circa 1880. The Bryant and May factory employs hundreds of workers, mostly teenage girls from the poorest families in the East End. These young women work 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, in rooms thick with toxic fumes and phosphorus dust. Meet Mary, 16 years old, who has been working at the factory for 2 years. She earns a meager wage that helps keep her family from starvation, but she pays for this income with her health. Every day, she sits at a long wooden bench with dozens of other girls, dipping wooden splints into a mixture of white phosphorus, sulfur, and other chemicals. The work seems simple enough. Dip the splints, arrange them in frames to dry, then pack them into boxes. But white phosphorus is one of the most toxic substances known to humanity. It glows eerily in the dark and ignites spontaneously in air, creating a perpetual fire hazard in the factory. More insidiously, its fumes slowly poison everyone who breathes them. Mary has begun to notice troubling changes in her health. Her teeth have started to loosen and ache constantly. Her breath carries a strange, metallic taste, and her gums have begun to swell and darken. These are the early signs of phossy jaw, a horrific condition caused by a phosphorus poisoning that would plague matchworkers for decades. As months pass, Mary's condition worsens. The phosphorus has begun to literally dissolve her jawbone. Her face swells grotesquely and her teeth fall out one by one. The dead bone tissue begins to glow with an eerie phosphorescent light in the darkness. The pain is excruciating and constant, making eating or sleeping nearly impossible. The factory owners are well aware of phossy jaw, but consider it simply a cost of doing business. Workers who develop the condition are dismissed without compensation, left to face their disfigurement and slow death alone. There are no safety measures, no ventilation systems, and no protective equipment for the workers. Mary's fellow workers show her kindness when they can, but they too are struggling with the early stages of phosphorus poisoning. Some girls as young as 13 already show the telltale signs: the metallic breath, the loosening teeth, the gradual swelling of the face. They know what awaits them, but they have few alternatives. Without this work, their families would face starvation. The only treatment for phossy jaw in those days was surgical removal of the affected bone tissue, often resulting in severe facial disfigurement. Many victims chose to endure the pain rather than submit to surgeries that would leave them even more unemployable and socially ostracized. The operations, performed without modern anesthetics or antiseptics, often led to infections that killed patients who might otherwise have survived their poisoning. The working conditions in match factories extended beyond the immediate danger of phosphorus poisoning. The buildings were often poorly ventilated fire traps, where the slightest spark could trigger devastating explosions. Workers were fined for talking, arriving late, or dropping matches. Bathroom breaks were strictly limited, and many girls suffered from kidney and bladder problems as a result. Despite these horrors, the match industry continued to thrive because the product was essential to daily life in an era before electric lighting. Every household needed matches, and the demand seemed inexhaustible. Factory owners grew wealthy while their workers suffered and died from preventable diseases. The turning point came in 1888 with the famous London Match Girls strike. Led by social activists like Annie Besant, the workers at Bryant and May walked out, demanding better working conditions and an end to the crippling system of fines. The strike captured public attention and sympathy, eventually forcing improvements in working conditions and wages. More importantly, the publicity surrounding the strike led to increased awareness of phossy jaw and other industrial diseases. Gradually, safer alternatives to white phosphorus were developed, and regulations were enacted to protect workers. But change came slowly, and thousands more workers would suffer and die before white phosphorus was finally banned from match production in the early 20th century. In the early decades of the 20th century, as the world marveled at the discovery of radium and its seemingly magical properties. A group of young women in New Jersey and Illinois unknowingly volunteered themselves for one of industrial history's most tragic experiments. They were the Radium Girls, and their story reveals how corporate greed and scientific ignorance could combine with devastating consequences. It was 1917, and America had entered World War I. In factories across the country, young women were painting watch dials with a new revolutionary paint that glowed in the dark. This paint, made from radium, was applied to military timepieces, aircraft instruments, and luxury watches, allowing them to be read in darkness. The work was considered glamorous and well-paying, attracting bright, educated young women eager to contribute to the war effort. Let us meet Grace, an 18-year-old high school graduate working at the United States Radium Corporation in Orange, New Jersey. She sits at a workbench with dozens of other young women, each equipped with a small brush, a pot of glowing paint, and hundreds of watch dials to be painted with precise, tiny numerals. Grace has been taught the technique called lip pointing, twisting the brush to a fine point, using her lips and tongue before dipping it in the radium paint and applying it to the watch dial. Her supervisors assure her that the paint is harmless, even beneficial. Some claim it will make her teeth whiter and her complexion more radiant. The women joke about being able to glow in the dark, not realizing how prophetic their humor will prove to be. The work requires incredible precision and speed. Grace must paint dozens of dials each day, earning piece-rate wages based on her output. Each time she points her brush with her lips, she ingests tiny amounts of radium. The women have no idea that they are consuming one of the most radioactive substances on Earth, thousands of times more potent than uranium. For months, Grace and her colleagues notice nothing amiss. The work is pleasant enough, the pay good, and the company atmosphere cheerful. Some of the women even take home extra paint to decorate their clothing and jewelry for parties, creating dresses and accessories that glow mysteriously in darkened rooms. They paint their fingernails and even their teeth with the luminous substance, delighting friends and family with their radiant smiles. But gradually, disturbing symptoms begin to appear. Grace's teeth start to loosen and fall out. Her jaw aches constantly, and she develops painful ulcers in her mouth. She feels weak and fatigued, unable to maintain her former energy levels. When she visits a dentist, he is horrified to discover that her jawbone is literally crumbling, riddled with holes like Swiss cheese. Other women in the factory report similar symptoms. Some develop severe anemia, their bodies unable to produce healthy blood cells. Others suffer from bone fractures that heal poorly or not at all. A few develop mysterious tumors and cancers. Most disturbing of all, some of the women begin to glow in the dark, their bones, teeth and hair emitting an eerie phosphorescence visible in darkened rooms. The company initially denies any connection between the paint and the workers' illnesses. Corporate executives claim that radium is not only harmless, but actually beneficial to health, citing advertisements for radium-laced patent medicines and cosmetics. They commission their own studies, conducted by company-friendly scientists, that declare the workplace safe. Meanwhile, the women continue to sicken and die. Grace develops a condition called radium jaw, where her entire lower mandible disintegrates, leaving her face horribly disfigured. She can barely eat or speak, and the constant pain makes sleep nearly impossible. Her body's production of white blood cells plummets, leaving her vulnerable to every infection. Some of the women attempt to seek legal redress, but they face enormous obstacles. The connection between radium exposure and their illnesses is difficult to prove scientifically, and the company has far more resources for legal battles than the sick workers. Many of the women die before their cases can be resolved, their deaths attributed to other causes by sympathetic company doctors. The breakthrough comes when independent scientists begin studying the women's remains. They discover that the victims' bones continue to emit radioactivity years after death, providing undeniable proof of radium poisoning. Photographs taken in dark rooms show the ghostly outline of skeletons glowing through coffin wood and burial shrouds. Finally, in the late 1920s, several surviving women succeed in bringing their cases to court. The legal battles drag on for years, with the women growing progressively sicker, while corporate lawyers deploy every possible delay tactic. Some plaintiffs die before seeing justice, their final years consumed by painful court battles and mounting medical bills. The case of the Radium girls eventually leads to significant improvements in workplace safety regulations and workers' compensation laws. Their sacrifice helps establish the principle that employers have a duty to protect workers from occupational hazards, even those not fully understood at the time. But for Grace and her colleagues, these victories come too late. Most die young, their bodies destroyed by the very substance they believed was harmless. Their story serves as a permanent reminder that progress and profit must never come at the expense of worker safety, and that corporate assurances of safety must always be verified by independent scientific research. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, far from sunlight and fresh air, millions of men and boys have spent their lives extracting the coal that powered the industrial world. From medieval drift mines to massive 20th century operations, coal mining has consistently ranked among humanity's most dangerous and difficult occupations. Let us descend into a coal mine in Wales during the height of the Industrial Revolution, circa 1860. The Rhondda Valley echoes with the sounds of pickaxes and blasting powder as thousands of miners work in shifts around the clock to feed Britain's insatiable hunger for coal. Meet David, a miner who begins his day at 4 a.m. with a meal of bread and dripping. He joins hundreds of other men at the pit head, where they crowd into crude wooden cages for the terrifying descent into darkness. The cage plummets down the shaft at heart-stopping speed, finally jerking to a halt hundreds of feet below ground in a world where the sun has never shone. The mine tunnels stretch for miles in all directions, following the coal seams wherever they lead. The passages are barely wide enough for a man to crawl through, with roof supports that groan ominously under the weight of countless tons of rock above. The air is thick with coal dust that coats everything black and fills the lungs with each breath. David's shift will last 12 hours or more, spent crouched in cramped tunnels hacking at the coalface with primitive tools. The work is backbreaking, as each ton of coal must be loosened by hand, loaded into small carts, and pushed along narrow tracks to the main shaft. The temperature in the deep tunnels often exceeds 100 degrees Fahrenheit, while other areas remain perpetually damp and cold. The dangers are omnipresent and varied. Cave-ins can occur without warning, crushing miners under tons of rock and trapping survivors for days or weeks. Explosive methane gas seeps from coal seams, creating an atmosphere where a single spark from metal striking rock can trigger devastating explosions that kill dozens of men instantly. Flooding is another constant threat. Underground streams and surface water can breach tunnel walls, drowning miners who cannot reach safety in time. Many mines employ young boys as trappers, children as young as 8 who sit alone in darkness for 12 hours, opening and closing ventilation doors as minecarts pass through. These children often fall asleep at their posts, creating deadly air circulation problems. David has witnessed many tragedies in his 20 years underground. He remembers the explosion of 1856 that killed 47 men, including his own brother. The victims were found weeks later, their bodies blackened and twisted by the blast, often identifiable only by their personal belongings. The company paid modest compensation to widows, but took no meaningful steps to improve safety. Black lung disease is the miner's constant companion, though in David's time it is simply accepted as part of the job. Years of breathing coal dust have left his lungs scarred and damaged, making each breath a struggle. He coughs constantly, bringing up black phlegm that stains his clothing and bed sheets. He knows that many miners die young from lung disease, but he has a family to feed and no other skills to fall back on. The physical toll of mining extends beyond lung damage. David's back is permanently bent from years of working in low tunnels. His hands are scarred and calloused from handling rough coal and sharp tools. He suffers from miner's nystagmus, a condition where years of working in dim light cause involuntary eye movements and severe headaches. Working conditions vary little from mine to mine or century to century. Safety improvements come slowly, usually only after major disasters that shock the public conscience. The installation of ventilation fans, safety lamps, and structural supports gradually reduces some risks, but mining remains inherently dangerous well into the modern era. The social conditions of mining communities reflect the harsh realities of the work. Miners and their families live in company-owned towns where they shop at company stores, often falling into debt bondage that keeps them tied to the mines for life. The company controls not just employment, but housing, education, and even religious services, creating a form of industrial feudalism. Despite these hardships, mining communities develop strong bonds of mutual support and solidarity. The shared dangers create deep friendships among the men who depend on each other for survival in the depths. Mining families band together to help widows and orphans, creating informal social safety nets in an era before government welfare programs. Labor organizing comes naturally to mining communities, as the men understand that only collective action can improve their working conditions. Some of the most significant labor battles in industrial history occur in mining regions, with strikes often turning violent as companies bring in armed guards to break union activities. The human cost of coal mining is staggering. In Britain alone, thousands of miners die each year in accidents during the peak industrial period. In the United States, mining disasters regularly kill dozens or hundreds of men at once. Yet production continues with minimal interruption. Each ton of coal extracted represents immense human suffering, a price that society has been willing to pay for the energy that powers modern civilization. As our journey through history's most difficult occupations draws to a close, let us take a moment to reflect on what these stories teach us about human resilience, social progress, and our ongoing responsibility to protect workers everywhere. The men, women, and children whose stories we have shared tonight were not abstract historical figures, but real people with hopes, dreams, and families who depended on them. They woke each morning knowing that their work might kill or maim them, yet they persevered because they had few alternatives. Their labor built the foundations of our modern world, though their contributions are rarely acknowledged or remembered. These occupations existed because society needed the services they provided, Yet those who performed the work were often ostracized, underpaid, and forgotten. The Roman fullers ensured that citizens could appear in public in clean clothing. The medieval gong farmers prevented cities from drowning in waste. The child chimney sweeps kept hearths burning safely in grand houses. The match girls provided the light that illuminated homes before electricity. The radium dial painters helped soldiers read their instruments in the darkness of war. The coal miners extracted the fuel that powered the Industrial Revolution. Each of these groups paid an enormous price for providing essential services to society. They suffered not just physical pain and degradation, but social exclusion and economic exploitation. They were the invisible foundation upon which more fortunate people built comfortable lives, yet they received little gratitude or recognition for their sacrifices. What transformed these occupations from necessary evils into historical curiosities was not sudden technological breakthrough, but gradual social awakening. Public awareness, labor organizing, government regulation, and technological innovation combined over decades to eliminate the worst abuses and create safer alternatives. The process was slow and uneven. Reform often came only after tragic disasters that shocked public conscience. The great mine explosions, the match girl strike, the legal battles of the Radium girls. These events forced society to confront the human cost of its way of life and demand change. We might comfort ourselves by believing that such exploitative conditions are relics of the past, but this would be naive. Around the world today, millions of people still work in dangerous conditions for minimal pay, their suffering hidden from consumers who benefit from their labor. The garment workers who make our clothing, the miners who extract materials for our electronics, the agricultural workers who harvest our food, many still face conditions that would shock us if they occurred in our own communities. The stories we have shared tonight remind us that progress is never inevitable or permanent. Each generation must choose whether to ignore the suffering of others or take action to protect the vulnerable. The improvements in working conditions that we take for granted today were won through the struggles of ordinary people who refused to accept that their lives were expendable. The fuller, the gong farmer, the climbing boy, the match girl, the radium dial painter, and the coal miner. They all remind us that behind every convenience of modern life lies human labor, often performed under difficult conditions. They challenge us to ask uncomfortable questions about our own time. Whose suffering enables our comfort? What injustices are we willing to ignore for the sake of convenience or profit? As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you will carry with you a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices made by countless forgotten workers throughout history. Their stories, while sometimes dark, ultimately speak to the triumph of human dignity over exploitation, of hope over despair, of progress over indifference. May their memory inspire us to build a world where no one must choose between safety and survival, where all work is valued and all workers are protected. In remembering them, we honor not just the past, but commit ourselves to a more just future. Sleep well, knowing that their struggles were not in vain, and that their legacy lives on in every workplace safety rule, every labor protection, and every moment when we choose compassion over profit. The shadows of history grow long, but they point toward a brighter dawn. The Fire of Athens, a tale of democracy, war, and glory. Chapter 1. The Storm Gathering, 490 BCE. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Athenian agora as Miltiades strode through the marketplace, his weathered face etched with concern. The general's bronze-tipped spear gleamed as he pushed past merchants hawking their wares and philosophers debating in the shade of olive trees. Word had arrived that morning. The Persian fleet, vast as a moving forest, was crossing the Aegean Sea. In the democratic assembly, citizens gathered on the Nix Hill, their voices rising like waves against stone. Miltiades stood before them, his voice carrying across the crowd. Fellow Athenians, the great King Darius sends his armies not just to conquer our lands, but to extinguish the flame of democracy itself. Will we bow to a king who claims dominion over gods and men? The crowd murmured, fear mixing with defiance. Young Aristides, later called the Just, watched from the crowd as Miltiades continued. Marathon lies before us, a plain where we must choose between freedom and slavery. Our hoplites may be outnumbered, but remember, we fight not for the whims of a tyrant, but for our homes, our families, and our right to govern ourselves. As the assembly voted for war, a messenger named Eucles prepared for the most famous run in history. The stage was set for a clash that would echo through millennia, where a small democratic city-state would face the mightiest empire the world had ever known. The Persian storm clouds gathered, but Athens would not yield without a fight that would become legend. Chapter 2. Thunder at Marathon, September 490 BCE. The plain of Marathon stretched before them like a bronze mirror under the dawn light. Miltiades surveyed the Persian host, perhaps 25,000 strong, their colourful silks and glinting weapons a stark contrast to the bronze and leather of his 11,000 Athenians and their Plataean allies. Remember, Miltiades whispered to his fellow generals, we thin our centre and strengthen our wings. Let them think they're breaking through. Then we close like the jaws of a wolf. The Persian commander Artaphernes, resplendent in silk and gold, signalled the advance. His immortals, the elite guard of 10,000, marched forward with disciplined precision, their spears glittering like a deadly meadow of iron flowers. But Miltiades had studied Persian tactics during his years in the Crimea. As the enemy charged, he gave the signal. The Athenian wings, reinforced and disciplined, held firm while the centre appeared to buckle. Persian soldiers, sensing victory, pressed forward into what seemed like a rout. Then the trap closed. The Athenian wings wheeled inward like the arms of a deadly embrace. Caught in this pincer movement, the Persians found themselves surrounded, their superior numbers suddenly meaningless in the crush of bodies and bronze. The battle raged for hours. Callimachus, the war archon, fell pierced by many spears, but not before crying, "For Athens!" Young Cynaegirus grabbed a Persian ship with his bare hands as they tried to escape, losing his hand but saving countless lives. When the dust settled, 6,400 Persians lay dead. Athens had lost only 192 men. As Eucles began his legendary run to Athens with news of victory, he carried more than tidings of battle. He bore proof that free men fighting for their own cause could overcome the greatest empire on earth. Chapter 3. The Wooden Wall, 480 BCE. 10 years had passed since Marathon, but the victory's echo still rang through Athens when disturbing news arrived. Xerxes, son of Darius, was coming with an army that darkened the land like locusts. Herodotus would later write that the Persian host numbered over 1 million souls, soldiers, servants, and camp followers stretching from horizon to horizon. In the sacred chamber beneath the Acropolis, the oracle of Delphi's words haunted the Athenian leaders. Though all else shall be taken, Zeus the all-seeing grants that the wooden wall alone shall not fail. What did it mean? The old wooden palisade around the Acropolis, the masts of their ships, Themistocles, the brilliant but ambitious politician, stood before the assembly with eyes blazing. Fellow citizens, the wooden wall is our fleet. We must abandon our city, evacuate our families to Salamis and Aegina, and trust in our triremes. The crowd erupted in protests. Abandon Athens. Leave the sacred temples, the homes of their fathers, the very cradle of democracy. Old Aristides, despite his rivalry with Themistocles, stood and spoke. I have opposed Themistocles in peace, but in war there is no greater strategist. If he says our salvation lies in the sea, then to the sea we must go. As families packed their precious belongings, a child's clay toy, a grandmother's loom, scrolls of poetry, the evacuation began. From the Acropolis, the statue of Athena Parthenos seemed to watch sorrowfully as her people departed. The sacred olive tree, burned by Persian scouts, stood as a charred reminder of what they were leaving behind. But as the last ship departed Piraeus, something miraculous happened. From the blackened stump of Athena's olive, a new green shoot emerged, 2 cubits long. The goddess had not abandoned her people. The wooden wall would hold. Chapter 4. The Narrows of Destiny, September 480 BCE. In the narrow straits between Salamis and the mainland, Themistocles paced the deck of his flagship, watching the Persian fleet deploy in the pre-dawn darkness. Xerxes sat on his golden throne, carved into the mountainside, confident that he would witness the final destruction of Greek resistance. The Persian fleet was magnificent, over 1,200 ships from across the empire, Phoenician vessels with their purple sails, Egyptian ships with eyes painted on their prows to see through the waters of death, and vessels from a dozen subject nations. Against them, barely 380 Greek triremes waited in the narrows. But Themistocles had sent a secret message to Xerxes through a trusted slave. The Greeks planned to flee at dawn. Attack now to prevent their escape. It was a masterstroke of deception. By rushing to prevent the Greek escape, the Persians would crowd into the narrow waters where their numbers would become a disadvantage. As the sun rose over Mount Hymettus, the battle began. The Persian ships, magnificent in open water, found themselves trapped in the narrow straits like whales beached on shore. Their ships collided with each other as they struggled to maneuver, while the smaller, more agile Greek triremes darted between them like sharks among wounded prey. Artemisia, the warrior queen of Halicarnassus, fought magnificently for the Xerxes, even as she realized the battle was lost. Watching from his throne, the great king saw his fleet, the pride of his empire, shattered on the Greek bronze rams. Ship after ship went down, their crews crying out in a dozen languages as they drowned in the wine-dark sea. By evening, 200 Persian ships were sunk or captured. The wooden wall had held, and with it, the flame of Western civilization. Chapter 5. The Golden Dawn, 479 to 450 BCE. The Persian threat was finally ended at Plataea, where Spartan spears and Athenian determination drove the last invaders from Greek soil. But victory brought unexpected challenges. Athens, once the smaller sister to mighty Sparta, now commanded a naval empire that stretched across the Aegean. Pericles, the golden-tongued statesman with the elongated skull that cartoonists loved to mock, stood before the assembly with a vision that would transform Athens forever. Citizens, We have saved Greece from Persian tyranny. Now let us show the world what free men can build when they set their minds to greatness. Under Pericles' leadership, Athens entered its golden age. The silver mines of Laurion funded ambitious projects, while tribute from allied cities filled the treasury. The Parthenon rose on the Acropolis like a crown of marble, its columns mathematically perfect, its sculptures breathing with life despite their stone. In the Agora, Socrates began asking his famous questions, pursuing wisdom through relentless inquiry. The unexamined life is not worth living, he would tell anyone who would listen, including young Plato, who hung on every word. Sophocles premiered Oedipus Rex at the theatre of Dionysus, while Aeschylus composed tragedies that explored the nature of justice and fate. Artists flocked to Athens from across the Mediterranean. Phidias carved his masterpiece, the ivory and gold statue of Athena that dominated the Parthenon's inner chamber. Painters developed red figure pottery that depicted gods and heroes with unprecedented realism. Architects perfected the Doric and Ionic orders that would influence building for millennia. But perhaps most revolutionary was the development of democracy itself. Every free male citizen had a voice in the assembly, and important decisions were made by majority vote rather than royal decree. Chapter 6. Shadows and Glory, 450 to 430 BCE. The marble dust from the Parthenon's construction still hung in the air when darker clouds began gathering over Athens. Pericles, now at the height of his power, faced growing criticism from his political rivals. The comic poet Aristophanes lampooned him mercilessly, calling him onion head, and suggesting his policies were driven more by personal ambition than civic virtue. In the workshops surrounding the Acropolis, master craftsmen from across Greece labored on the temple's decorations. Phidias himself worked on the great frieze that would depict the Panathenaic procession, young horsemen, sacrificial cattle, and citizens bearing offerings to Athena. But even art became political. When Phidias included portraits of himself and Pericles on Athena's shield, his enemies accused him of impiety and embezzlement. The philosopher Anaxagoras, Pericles' friend and teacher, faced trial for claiming the sun was not a god, but a molten rock larger than the Peloponnese. Though Pericles secured his escape, the trial revealed growing tensions between traditional religion and new philosophical thinking. Meanwhile, Aspasia of Miletos, Pericles' brilliant companion, held salons where the greatest minds of Athens gathered. Foreign-born and therefore unable to marry Pericles legally, she nonetheless influenced policy through her quick wit and political acumen. Conservative Athenians disapproved of her influence, adding another strain to the social fabric. The city's wealth attracted not only artists and philosophers, but also ambitious men seeking power. Cleon the leather seller used populist rhetoric to challenge the old aristocratic families, while young Alcibiades, golden-haired and charismatic, began his meteoric rise through Athenian society. As the 430s dawned, Athens stood at its zenith, master of the seas, center of learning, and beacon of democracy. Yet the very success that brought glory also bred the conflicts that would test the city's greatness in the trials ahead. Chapter 7. The Price of Empire, 431 BCE. The tension had been building like pressure in a sealed amphora. Sparta, the austere military state that had helped save Greece from Persia, now watched with growing alarm as Athens transformed from ally to rival. The Peloponnesian War, when it finally erupted, would prove that Greeks could be as deadly to each other as any foreign enemy. It began, as many wars do, over a seemingly minor dispute. Corcyra and Corinth, two trading cities, quarrelled over a colony. Athens supported one side, Sparta the other. But beneath this surface conflict lay deeper fears. Sparta's terror of Athenian expansion and Athens' determination to maintain its empire. Pericles, now in his 60s but still commanding in the assembly, outlined his strategy. We will not meet the Spartans in open battle. Their hoplites are the finest in Greece. Instead, we withdraw behind our long walls, rely on our navy for supplies, and raid their coasts until they tire of war. The strategy was sound in theory but devastating in practice. As Athenian farmers abandoned their fields and crowded into the city, overcrowding bred disease. The plague that struck Athens in 430 BCE was unlike anything the Greeks had ever seen. Bodies piled in the streets, funeral pyres burned day and night, and social order collapsed as men faced death without honour. Thucydides, the great historian who survived the plague, described its horror. Men, not knowing what would happen to them, became careless of everything, both sacred and profane. The disease struck rich and poor alike. Even Pericles lost his legitimate sons, leaving only his son by Aspasia to carry on his name. Pericles himself succumbed in 429 BCE, his last words reportedly being gratitude that he had brought no mourning to any Athenian citizen through his policies. With his death, Athens lost not just a leader, but a vision of what the city could become. Chapter 8. The Flame Flickers, 415 to 404 BCE. After Pericles' death, Athens struggled to find leaders who combined his vision with his restraint. Into this vacuum stepped Alcibiades, brilliant, beautiful, and utterly without scruples. His proposal for the Sicilian expedition would prove to be Athens' greatest folly. "Fellow citizens," Alcibiades declared to the assembly, his golden hair catching the sunlight, "Syracuse grows fat on Sicilian grain, while we struggle with Spartan armies. One bold stroke could add Sicily's wealth to our empire and end this war in our favour." Nicias, the cautious general, opposed the plan with prophetic words. "We have enemies enough at our doorstep without seeking new ones across the sea. This expedition will drain our treasury and weaken our defences when we can least afford it." But Alcibiades' charisma prevailed. The expedition that sailed from Piraeus in 415 BCE was magnificent. Over 100 triremes, 5,000 hoplites, and the flower of Athenian youth. Citizens wept and cheered as their sons departed, not knowing that most would never return. The expedition was doomed from the start. Alcibiades himself was recalled to face charges of religious vandalism. Someone had mutilated the sacred herms throughout the city on the night before departure. Rather than face trial, he fled to Sparta and began advising Athens' enemies on how to defeat his homeland. In Sicily, the Athenians found themselves besieging Syracuse, while Syracusan cavalry harassed their supply lines. When Spartan reinforcements arrived under Gylippus, the siege turned into a trap. The Athenian fleet was destroyed in Syracuse harbour, and the survivors faced a nightmare retreat through hostile territory. The end came in the quarries of Syracuse, where thousands of Athenian prisoners died slowly of thirst, hunger, and exposure. Those who could recite verses from Euripides were sometimes given extra water by their captors, poetry becoming literally the difference between life and death. Chapter 9. The Last Stand, 404 BCE. Athens in 404 BCE was a shadow of its former glory. The long walls lay in ruins, the fleet was scattered, and Spartan soldiers patrolled the agora where Pericles had once spoken of Athenian greatness. The Golden Age was over, but the spirit that had created it endured in unexpected ways. Lysander, the Spartan admiral who had finally brought Athens to its knees, stood in the Parthenon and marveled at what his enemies had built. Unlike the Persian Xerxes, who had burned the earlier temples, Lysander left Phidias's masterpiece untouched. Even Sparta's harsh warriors recognized that some things transcended the temporary victories of war. The 30 tyrants, installed by Sparta to govern the defeated city, ruled through terror and confiscation. Critias, their leader and former student of Socrates, ordered the execution of hundreds of democrats and seized their property. The teacher watched in horror as his student perverted philosophy into an instrument of oppression. But resistance took many forms. Thrasybulus, leading a band of democratic exiles, captured the fortress of Philae and began guerrilla warfare against the tyrants. In workshops and symposiums, artists and thinkers kept alive the ideals that had made Athens great. Aristophanes wrote comedies that mocked the new order with dangerous wit, while potters continued creating red-figure vases showing scenes of heroic virtue. Most remarkably, ordinary citizens found ways to preserve democracy's essence even under tyranny. Secret assemblies met in private homes. Citizens smuggled food to the families of executed democrats, and teachers continued instruction in rhetoric and philosophy, the tools that had made Athens free. The end of the tyranny came swiftly. Thrasybulus's growing forces, supported by democrats within the city, overwhelmed the 30. In a gesture of remarkable magnanimity, the restored democracy declared amnesty for all but the worst collaborators. Athens had learned that revenge breeds only more revenge, and that true strength comes from forgiveness rather than retribution. Epilogue: The Eternal Flame, 399 BCE and beyond. The trial of Socrates in 399 BCE seemed to mark the final decline of Athenian greatness. The philosopher who had questioned everything, gods, traditions, the nature of justice itself, faced charges of corrupting the youth and introducing new deities. His student Plato watched in anguish as the city condemned its greatest teacher to death. Yet even in defeat, Socrates demonstrated the values that had made Athens exceptional. Offered a chance to escape, he refused, arguing that a citizen has a duty to accept the laws of his city, even when those laws seem unjust. The unexamined life is not worth living, he had taught, and he would not examine others' lives while fleeing the examination of his own. Drinking the hemlock with steady hands, Socrates spoke his final words about death as perhaps the greatest of all adventures. His courage transformed martyrdom into victory, and his ideas would outlive all the armies that had marched across Greece. The Athens that had challenged the Persian Empire was gone, but what it had created could never be destroyed. Plato established his academy, where students would study mathematics, philosophy, and statecraft for nearly 1,000 years. Aristotle, Plato's greatest pupil, would teach a young Macedonian prince named Alexander, who would carry Greek ideas to India and beyond. The architectural principles perfected in the Parthenon would shape buildings from Rome to Washington, D.C. The dramatic forms pioneered by Aeschylus and Sophocles would influence theatre through Shakespeare to the present day. The democratic ideal, despite its limitations and failures, would inspire revolutionaries in America, France, and around the world. Most importantly, Athens had proven that a small community of free citizens, united by shared ideals rather than fear of tyrants, could achieve greatness that would echo through millennia. The Golden Age lasted barely 50 years, but its light still illuminates our world today. A reminder that human beings, given freedom and opportunity, can create beauty, seek truth, and build justice that outlasts any empire built on conquest alone. The fire of Athens burned bright and brief, but from its embers, the flame of Western civilization would kindle and spread across the world. The fall of Constantinople, the end of an era. On May 29th, 1453, after a 53-day siege, the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Mehmed II, nicknamed the Conqueror, captured Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. This wasn't just a city falling. It was the death knell of the Eastern Roman Empire, which had stood for over 1,100 years since its founding in 330 CE by Emperor Constantine I. Located on the Bosporus Strait, Constantinople was a jewel, a fortified metropolis straddling Europe and Asia, guarded by massive Theodosian walls, and a centre of Christian orthodoxy, trade, and learning. Its fall marked the end of the Middle Ages and catalysed the Renaissance, the age of exploration, and the rise of Ottoman dominance. The build-up, a city under pressure. By the 15th century, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former glory. The Fourth Crusade in 1204 had sacked Constantinople, weakening it and splintering its territories. The Black Death, 1347 to 1351, decimated its population, dropping from over 400,000 to perhaps 50,000. The Ottoman Turks, a rising power since the 13th century under Osman I, had been encroaching for decades. By 1451, Mehmed II, at just 19 years old, ascended the Ottoman throne with a singular obsession: conquering Constantinople to fulfill a dream attributed to his ancestor Osman, uniting Islam's two holy cities, Mecca and Medina, with a new capital. The city's defences were formidable. The Theodosian walls, built in the 5th century, were a triple-layered marvel: a 5 to 6 metre outer wall, a 2 metre inner wall, and a 20 metre moat, stretching 5.7 kilometres along the landside. The Golden Horn, a natural harbour, was chained shut with a massive boom. Inside, Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos led a ragtag force of 7,000 to 10,000 defenders, Greeks, Genoese mercenaries, notably Giovanni Giustiniani, and even some Venetian sailors, against an Ottoman army of 50,000 to 80,000, backed by artillery. The siege, innovation and desperation. Mehmed II's strategy was bold and technological. He hauled 70 cannons, including the monstrous basilic cannon. Cast by Hungarian engineer Orban, it weighed 19 tons, fired 600-pound stone balls up to 1.5 kilometers, and took 3 hours to reload. On April 6, 1453, the bombardment began, shaking the walls with relentless force. The Ottomans also built a circumvallation wall to cut off land escape and a floating roadway of boats to drag ships overland into the Golden Horn, bypassing the chain, a feat completed by April 22nd, shocking the defenders. Inside, the Byzantines fought with ingenuity. They repaired walls nightly, used Greek fire and napalm-like incendiary, and prayed for a crusade that never came. Western Europe, distracted by internal wars and the recent loss at Varna, 1444, sent only a trickle of aid. A final hope was a rumoured relief fleet from Genoa, but it arrived too late. On May 28th, a last-ditch liturgy at Hagia Sophia saw Constantine XI vowing to die with his city, a poignant scene as bells tolled and citizens braced for the end. The breach, a night of chaos. The final assault began at 1 a.m. on May 29th. Mehmed launched wave after wave, first irregular Bashi bazooks, then elite janissaries. The walls held until a critical moment. Accounts differ, but a small gate, likely the Kirkeporte, was left ajar, possibly by fleeing defenders, and Ottoman troops poured in. Giustiniani, wounded, withdrew, demoralizing the garrison. By dawn, the Ottomans breached the Saint, Romanus Gate, and Constantine XI, last Byzantine emperor, reportedly died fighting, though his body was never found. Legend says he was buried under rubble or turned into a marble statue to rise again. The city fell by mid-morning. Mehmed entered Hagia Sophia, ordering it converted into a mosque. It remained so until 1935, when it became a museum, and now, since 2020, a mosque again. The sack was brutal but restrained by Mehmed's orders. 3 days of looting were allowed, yielding immense wealth, gold, relics, and the famed Golden Fleece chain. But he spared many lives to repopulate his new capital. The aftermath. A world transformed. The fall stunned Christendom. Pope Nicholas V called for a crusade, but Europe was too fractured. France and England were in the 100 Years' War's tail end, and the Holy Roman Empire was a patchwork. Instead, it triggered a diaspora of Greek scholars to Italy, carrying manuscripts of Plato, Aristotle, and others. This intellectual exodus fueled the Renaissance, with figures like Marsilio Ficino, translating texts that reshaped Western thought. Trade routes shifted. The Silk Road's western terminus was now Ottoman-controlled, pushing European powers, Portugal, Spain, to seek sea routes. This set the stage for Columbus's 1492 voyage, backed by Ferdinand and Isabella, who were partly motivated by the loss of Constantinople. The Ottomans renamed it Istanbul, from the Greek Aistin Polin, meaning to the city, making it their capital until 1923, and it became a multicultural hub, blending Byzantine, Islamic, and later Turkish influences. Deeper historical layers. Technology's role. The basilic cannon was a game-changer, but its slow reload rate showed artillery's limits. Future sieges relied on lighter, faster guns. Orban, the cannon's creator, had offered his services to Constantine XI first, but the emperor couldn't afford him. A bitter irony. Cultural clash. The siege pitted Orthodox Christianity against rising Ottoman Islam, but Mehmed admired Byzantine culture, preserving Hagia Sophia's mosaics, covered, not destroyed, and hiring Greek scholars. Eyewitness accounts, chroniclers like George Francis, Constantine's aide, and Ottoman historian Tursun Beg offer vivid details. Francis mourned the emperor's death, while Tursun praised Mehmed's divine destiny. Long-term echoes. The Fool inspired art, Bellini's portrait of Mehmed, and literature, Byron's poetry. It also shifted global power, with the Ottomans dominating the Eastern Mediterranean until their decline after World War I. Fun and obscure tidbits. A rumor persists that Constantine XI's spirit haunts Istanbul, tied to a prophecy he'd return as a marble emperor. Mehmed, at 21 during the conquest, was a polymath, fluent in Greek, Latin, and Persian. He later wrote poetry and commissioned the Topkapi Palace. The Golden Horn's chain, now in the Istanbul Archaeology Museum, weighs 5 tons and was forged with Byzantine ingenuity. The 1925 eclipse and the radio breakthrough. On September 6, 1925, Sir Frank Watson Dyson, a towering figure in British astronomy, orchestrated an expedition during a total solar eclipse. This eclipse's path of totality stretched from northern Scotland across the North Sea, grazing parts of Norway, Sweden, and down to North Africa, with the longest totality, 2 minutes 23 seconds, observed near the Faroe Islands. Dyson, stationed likely in the UK or a nearby observation point, teamed up with Charles Cree and other physicists to use the eclipse to filter out terrestrial radio interference. Their hypothesis: the sun might emit radio waves, but Earth's atmosphere and human-made noise were drowning them out. By timing their observations during the moon's brief occlusion of the sun, they detected a noticeable drop in static on their receivers, evidence that the sun was indeed a radio source. The tech was basic: vacuum tube radios tuned to long wavelengths around 10 to 20 meters, far cruder than today's precision instruments. Yet, this crude setup captured a signal drop that hinted at solar emissions, likely from the sun's chromosphere or corona, layers we now know are buzzing with activity. This wasn't a direct measurement of the waves themselves, but an inference, a tantalizing clue that spurred decades of research. The science behind it, fast forward to today's understanding. The sun's radio waves originate from its dynamic atmosphere. Solar flares and coronal mass ejections, CMEs, accelerate electrons, which spiral in the sun's magnetic fields, emitting radio waves via a process called cyclotron radiation. Sunspots, those dark, cool patches on the sun's surface, also contribute by creating localized magnetic turbulence. The 1925 team couldn't see these details, but their work planted the seed. By the 1940s, Grote Reber, an American radio engineer, built a 9-meter homemade radio telescope in his backyard and mapped solar radio emissions, confirming bursts that aligned with sunspot cycles. Today, instruments like the Carl G. Jansky Very Large Array, VLA, and the Low Frequency Array, LOFAR, detect these waves across frequencies from kilohertz to gigahertz, revealing a sun that's far noisier than it looks. Dyson's legacy and the 1919 connection. Dyson wasn't new to eclipse fame. In 1919, during another total eclipse, visible from South America and Africa, he led an expedition to test Einstein's general relativity. Einstein predicted that the sun's gravity would bend starlight, and Dyson's team photographed stars near the sun's edge, confirming a shift of 1.75 arc-seconds, matching Einstein's calculations. This catapulted relativity into the public eye and showcased Dyson's knack for turning eclipses into scientific gold mines. The 1925 radio work built on this reputation, shifting focus from visible light to invisible waves, a pivot that redefined astronomy. Evolution of radio astronomy. The 1925 discovery was a catalyst. In 1932, Carl Jansky, working for Bell Labs, accidentally discovered radio waves from the Milky Way while studying static, birthing radio astronomy as a field. The sun's role was clarified further in 1942, when British radar operators noticed solar interference during World War II, linking it to sunspots. This led to dedicated solar radio observatories, like the Nobayama radio heliograph in Japan, which now tracks the sun in real time. On this very day in 2025, solar physicists might be analyzing data from the Parker Solar Probe, launched in 2018, which has flown through the sun's corona, giving us unprecedented radio and plasma data. Cultural and practical impact. The 1925 eclipse wasn't just science, it was a cultural event. Newspapers across Europe reported on the darkened skies and Dyson's team, fueling public interest in the cosmos. Practically, understanding solar radio emissions became crucial. CMEs can trigger geomagnetic storms, like the 1989 event that blacked out Quebec. Today, the Space Weather Prediction Center uses radio data to forecast these events, protecting satellites and power grids. The sun's 11-year cycle is peaking toward a solar maximum around 2025. So right now, observatories are likely buzzing with activity, perhaps even detecting a flare as we speak. Fun facts and modern twists. The 1925 eclipse's path missed major cities, but small towns like Lerwick in Scotland saw totality, drawing amateur astronomers with homemade telescopes. Dyson's team worked with rudimentary logbooks and manual calculations. Imagine doing that under eclipse pressure. Today, citizen scientists use apps like Radio Jove to listen to solar radio bursts from home, echoing Dyson's pioneering spirit. The sun's radio noise can mimic Morse code during intense flares, a phenomenon dubbed solar static that amateur radio operators still chase.